You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you by our brilliant sponsor XDeep and by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, looking back over the 80 episodes I've produced for Speaking Sidemount, there's a massive slant towards cave diving and exploration. I guess it goes without saying that this is as it should be, with cave diving and the exploits of cave explorers being the pinnacle of the application of the sidemount configuration in diving. In the early days of sidemount, it was indeed cave divers who were looking for a method of managing their equipment that made it easier for them to get to remote dive sites or through dry cave passage, and even more importantly, opened up the possibilities of passing restrictions and extending the explored limits of caves. But in the past 10 years, this has changed. Yes, cave divers are still learning sidemount. However, there's a large and growing segment learning sidemount on their way to cave diving or to gain the many benefits and flexibility that sidemount offers for open water, wreck diving, or mine diving. So I'm really pleased to be able to bring you an episode where we go back to our roots and talk about sidemount as a configuration for many environments, and also get into some of the detail as to how to set up your sidemount system and then put it in the water. Chris Godlewski is a Polish sidemount instructor who's been resident in the UK for many years. He came to my attention through a glowing review by one of his students, and then the work he's been doing with his wife Chloe, where under the banner of Sidemount Society, they've been traveling the world diving sidemount. Now, most recently, they've been in the Philippines, and if you haven't seen their social media, do yourself a favor and check it out. Not only is the imagery and videography top shelf, but they are demonstrating a very high standard of diving and acting as awesome role models for sidemount in general. In this episode, Chris shares on how he got into diving and sidemount. We learn about some of his early struggles with the configuration and how they overcame them to get better. I asked Chris about his and Chloe's amazing decision to leave their work lives behind to travel the world and dive. And we talk about Sidemount Society, what it is, and what they hope to achieve. Chris and I go back and forth a bit on what it takes to be good in sidemount. We talk about the hows and the whys of sidemount equipment setup, and then we discuss putting it in the water. Everything from donning and doffing to entries and exits to how to achieve trim and stability, along with tips on executing skills, including the dreaded long hose stow. I find out more about Chris and Chloe's plans for their travel and also their hopes for setting up a sidemount specific dive operation in the future. All this and much, much more on this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Hey Chris, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thank you, Steve. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Great, mate. Hey, I've been watching what you've been doing with Sidemount Society on social media, and I'm really excited to have you on the show. As you and I mentioned off mic, I've been doing a lot of episodes on cave diving, and I like the fact that I've been doing that. But at the same time, I see this as a really great opportunity to get back to our roots of sidemount diving, to talk a little bit more about that and what it takes to be a good diver. But let's start off, as we always do, by giving you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you got into diving.
Thank you. So I was born in the Lake District of Poland. So I've always been connected with water. I've always been a water baby, if you like. I moved to London over 25 years ago and been living over there since. Now, my first ever experience with diving was over 20 years ago when I went on a holiday in Egypt and did a little try dive. Obviously, go back to London thinking, diving, London, UK, probably the last thing you can ever imagine. And it just kind of left it there. And it wasn't until 10 years later when I met Chloe, my wife, and she was actually a diving instructor at the time, working for one of the dive shops in London. She introduced me to diving. We did a proper DSD, we did an open water course, and everything else was history, basically. I fell in love with diving from day one, started doing all my courses, went to do dive master and instructor course. And then it wasn't until 2018 when we both decided to do a sidemount course.
Who did you do that with?
So we did it in London, in cold, murky lake water. We used, basic neoprene dry suits with wet gloves. Water temperature was about 1.5, 2 degrees. So you can imagine. Probably 10 minutes into the dive, and you get this feeling, you numbness in your fingers, and you're trying to press the bolt snap. You can feel it, but you can physically, literally not do anything about it. It was a bit frustrating, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, sure. I loved it from day one. For me, side mount, the overall feeling, just being balanced in the water, to me, it was great. Chloe had a slightly different experience with it. She had a bit of a kind of love and hate relationship with it. She was getting frustrated with the tinkering, the inconsistent results, if you like. So yeah, it was challenging. We were both kind of going slightly, off course. I was going one route. I was doing all the studying. I was watching and listening to your shows, for example, and Miho's videos and Audrey's videos, and Steve Bogart's and all them lot. Attending a lot of forums and online references with regard to how to set up your kit, how to adjust your kit, and all that kind of stuff. So I was just playing in the water. I was in my element. I loved it. And it wasn't until I think it was 2019, Chloe and I went on a dive trip, and we were diving with the Technical Dive Center in the Canary Islands, who actually knew a bit about side mount diving. And that is when Chloe's attitude towards the whole and her whole approach to side mount diving changed. She just said, I'm going into it full blast. So we signed up into side mounting, Steve Martin's course. We started watching again a lot of stuff. She stripped her kit from literally down to zero and just started readjusting and reassembling everything from scratch. Yeah, and since then it was just great. We both loved it. We dive side mount exclusively 100% of the time, regardless of where we dive, whether it's boat, shore, we love it.
Yeah, and there's so much to talk about in there. I mean, some of my own experience sort of maps to yours a bit. I did a very good side mount course, as many will have heard before, in Mexico a fair while ago now. It was in 2013, so nearly 10 years. And it was a good course, but it was freshwater aluminium cylinders, or aluminum for our American friends. And then I immediately took it back to Monterey, California, to quite cold water, 10 Celsius, and dry suit, and was then experimenting with steel cylinders because there was no one on the west coast of the US that was diving side mount at all that I could find. And so I started out with some 100 cubic foot cylinders, which are absolutely terrible, and then some dumpy cylinders, which were even worse. And finally, I found it in an online forum way back then that you should use LP85. So I got some LP85s, and that was the beginning of me starting to get some semblance of decency about my diving, back to how I could with the aluminium and fresh water. And I was just messing around myself for years and years. And a little bit like you, it wasn't until I went to Gozo and hung out with Tom and Audrey there that all of a sudden you see what's possible. And it just takes a little bit. Just takes, lay your gear down. And I remember both Tom and Audrey looking at it and saying, oh, you should change this, you should do this, you should move this here and there. And just all of these myriad of small changes started to make a big difference. And then, of course, getting in the water with them and seeing them as role models and being able to observe them and copy them then gave me the opportunity to improve really quickly. And obviously then you just need to put it in the water and practice. I love what you said, especially with Chloe, about stripping it back right to the beginning if you feel like you're going down the wrong path, and then bringing it back again properly. I think that's a really, really good point.
It is. And also, because we obviously, especially when we kind of new to side mount diving, we don't realize, like you said, that, literally every little inch of adjustment makes a huge difference. And unless we've actually got an experience with it and actually know how, what the impact, what the results are, we're always going to have those problems, and we've had inconsistent dives when, we go on dive one and everything's fine. And then we go on dive two, cylinders are half empty and we just all over the place. And you do get frustrated. You really, really do get frustrated. I always tell my students, listen, side mount, unless you're into the faffing business, you're going to struggle with it. It's not like, you put the jacket on and you jump in the water. It's completely different.
And yet it's so cool when you do get it right, isn't it? Let's get on to some more of that in a moment, because by way of some more background, you're traveling the world at the moment, and this intrigues me greatly because I love the idea of doing that. I know you worked for IBM for quite a while, and then Microsoft. I have a background in IT as well, more in software, but it was really pretty cool to see someone taking some time to go and experience some of the very best dive places in the world. And you're currently in the Philippines. Tell us a bit about what led you to that decision, and then also what you're doing and what your plans are.
To be honest, the trigger point, was the pandemic. We were sat at home, no diving, no traveling for a couple of years. Job-wise, yes, we had well-paid jobs, but, we knew that we wanted to do something with diving. dive, pretty much every single day of the year or whatever, if we possibly can. So we made the decision to quit our jobs. It was a really, really hard decision because of this. Yeah, well, you think to yourself, bloody hell, what happens? What if it doesn't work? What do we do? But unless you take the risks, you're never gonna know, and potentially you're always gonna regret it, right? So we've decided to quit our jobs and go away. So we started in Gozo. We went to see Audrey. We did some courses with her. We made really, really good contacts over there and friendships. Got fantastic experiences. I mean, Audrey is just, she's like a Jedi in the water, right? And she's an absolutely fantastic role model. So we loved it. We had a great time. From that, we went to Thailand, spent a couple of weeks there diving pretty much in Koh Tao. And again, it was the decision based on the climate, on the weather. People were telling us, don't go to the other places because of the monsoon. Koh Tao was probably the safest choice. When we arrived, it literally bucketed it down for 10 days in a row. Couldn't do anything. But hey, so we dived there, and the original plan was to actually go to Indonesia straight after Thailand. But the reason we decided to start with the Philippines is because Philippines were the first ones to relax all the rules. And it was easiest to get in.
Yes.
To go into Indo, we would have to go to Jakarta and quarantine for 10 days. We just thought, it's just too much hassle. So we got a bit lazy because we've been here for over 6 months now.
Well, clearly you love it.
It's fantastic. And again, for us, the whole idea and the whole purpose of this trip was to obviously gain experience, to have the experience in all the different environments, like we were talking about steels, aluminiums, so, all that kind of stuff, diving from different dive centers again, see how people run their businesses and see how people operate and, experiencing those different conditions, boat, shore, you name it or whatever. It is great. It's invaluable. But we had decided that, 6 months or 7 months by the time we leave is enough. So we made the decision with the beginning of the new year to go to Indonesia and actually experience the stuff that we wanted to experience from day one. So we will probably start somewhere in Bali and then maybe just travel around Indo and, hopefully dive and again, experience all the different dive sites over there. My dream goal would be to find, someone as passionate about Sidemount as myself and maybe get into, some proper Sidemount teaching. Who knows? We'll see what happens. I think that's the beauty of it is the unknown here, right? And you don't have to kind of plan, on this schedule where you think to yourself, right, this is the date I have to, move or, change. You just kind of, follow what's good to you.
It really is. The interesting thing I find, I'm about to, in fact, tomorrow's my birthday, so I'm not going to say which year it is because it'll be embarrassing for me, but it's a big one. Thank you. And one of the things, I gave a speech at my little party the other day, had a bunch of friends, which was just awesome to catch up with so many who hadn't seen for a while, actually. And I kind of reflected on every 10-year increment in my life from being born to 10 years old to 20, 30, 40 and beyond. And one of the things that is kind of shocking when you look back is how much things change every 10 years. And how if you told me at the beginning of that 10-year period where I would end up at the end of it, I would have been just absolutely stunned by that. And none of them I've been unhappy with. All of them I've been really happy with what's happened. But at the same time, it's just staggering. I mean, my last big birthday was in Silicon Valley, as the president of a software company. And here I am living in the far north of New Zealand, running a podcast on Sidemount diving, and doing a bunch of other stuff. Who would have thought that would have happened? And had you told me, I might have smiled and chuckled a little bit to myself and just shook my head and wondered exactly how that would come about, It's pretty cool. And it's one of the great things about life. If I can pass on any wisdom to younger people, it's don't ever put limits on yourself and always be prepared to make a change if you feel you want to and go and experience stuff, because sadly you never know when the last day is going to be. And so go and make the most of every single one that you get. Of course, listening to you talk about travel, wow, it's just amazing.
But you're actually spot on because, we may use this kind of cliche word of, follow your dreams or whatever, but do, if it makes you happy, do, what's the point being stuck, somewhere doing something you don't love? And we have one life, right? Let's enjoy it.
Very cool. And Sidemount diving can be a big part of that for sure. Now, you started a thing called Sidemount Society, and I guess the reason I noticed you was because of the social media that you've been doing. Firstly, I want to congratulate you on the quality of it. The photography is amazing. The video is really, really cool. We're going to talk about that some more. Love everything you're doing there. I went to your Facebook page, I think, and there's a post in there. I think it's quite recent, and I want to quote what you've written in there because I think it's the key to Sidemount diving. It's quite concise, but you've hit the nail on the head. And here it is. So Sidemount diving is not just about redundancy, stability, balance, and looking great underwater. Sidemount diving is a form of art, not just in aesthetics, but more importantly, the feeling of freedom of movement through the water. But to get that feeling takes a lot of time and practice, whether at 5 meters, 45 meters, 2 tanks or 4 tanks. That feeling of freedom and comfort in the water is the end goal. The point is no longer to carry gas, get out and enjoy the day. The point is to work on and perfect the art. Man, I love that. Tell us where you're going with that and what you were thinking when you wrote that.
Well, let's start with Sidemount Society. So, the concept initially was a basic concept. We just wanted an Instagram page, an YouTube channel to showcase our photos and videos. Why Sidemount Society? There was this YouTube video by the guys from Behind the Mask, and it was called Dive to Be Alive, if I remember correctly. And the video was made to promote a dive center in Darwin, actually, and we were actually diving on that exact dive site, which was a fantastic experience. The dive center was called Dive Society, and we thought, Dive Society, Sidemount Society would be a cool name. So we just thought, yeah, why not? But then as we started traveling, we thought, okay, why don't we actually make something out of it? So, why don't we actually start showcasing our travels? Why don't we actually use Sidemount Society, as a means to maybe even connect people, to create sort of like a little community of sidebound divers? And it's great, and it's worked. Through social media, again, we arrived in the Philippines, we arrived in Darwin, we started posting pictures, and suddenly we get messages from people, I dive Sidemount, I'm here, let's meet up. And, and suddenly you realize that there are divers there by all kind of doing their own thing, if you like. So it was really, really cool way of connecting people together. And since then, it's just started exploding. I get messages from people every single day, from experienced sidemount divers to beginners, telling me, I want to do a sidemount course. What would you advise? What your recommendations are. So I get to talk about sidemount all day, and I love it, and it's great. So yeah, it's going really, really well. I'm actually stunned by, the response rates that we get on that. It's awesome. And I get to showcase my picture on there, which is even better.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, both the YouTube channel and the Instagram page or site is just awesome. If you haven't subscribed already to Sidemount Society, immediately after you subscribe to Sidemount Pros, go straight there and do that afterwards because it's just awesome. I love your video in particular. It looks like you're doing some amazing color correction on there too, because the colors are just stunning. The videography as well is great, great music. And of course, it wouldn't count for anything if the diving wasn't any good. And I say this many, many times. There's a lot of people out there who talk about Sidemount and talk about other types of diving, but there's very little quality video available. And I kind of feel if you're good at Sidemount, then you should be able to demonstrate that through video. It's one of the things I've always lived by. I think I got that from Tom and Audrey as well. It's one of the reasons I went to them was they had a video. I remember they're actually diving in the States. It was shipwreck diving. I can't remember which wreck it was on, but it was just this video of them, and it was just staggering how good they were in that video. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and train with those guys. So it's a really great way to showcase what you've got. And as you say, to be able to share on Sidemount diving too. One thing I find really interesting though, like I put so much work into my videos and they come out great, but posting 5 photographs gets you much more of a following and many, many more likes than the 5 hours you spend editing a video. So sometimes I find that really interesting, but that's just social media for you. Maybe I haven't cracked the code on that yet.
Oh, it is. And, we had a funny conversation with Audrey with her laugh when I was there in Gozo. And she's like, I post pictures and, sometimes you think to yourself, well, these are going to be awesome. These are going to have a huge, interest rate. And it just doesn't work. Sometimes you post something, you think, oh, this is rubbish. But that's the one that gets the most kind of response, if you like. It's like, and you think to yourself, how does it work? I haven't cracked.
I have no idea. Some of my video, I did one on cave diving in Mount Gambier, and I was so proud of it. It's a really, really good video. So if you haven't seen it, go and see it. But I've got one with 70,000 views. It's wreck diving in Gozo. And it's some decent diving with Tom and Audrey. Both of them are in it. And I'm in it. And it's an okay video. But it's nowhere near as good as some of the other ones that I've done. And yet that one has 70,000 views and the other one has like 500. And I can't figure out why that is the case. And so I've got a couple of others from the show. Obviously, the one that I did with Ed Sorensen on the body recoveries morbidly has got also a lot of views and probably the most comments, but it is a hard thing and I'm clearly not smart enough to have cracked it yet. And to be honest, here's the thing too, if you're doing it for any other reason than yourself, I think you're kind of in for a bit of disappointment as well. So every single video I create, I do it for me. It's kind of a record of the dives I've done. And if other people like it, then great. If they don't watch it or whatever, then you just have to accept that, don't you?
It's spot on because in the end of the day, we're doing what we love and we're proud of it because We've put a lot of work into it. So yeah, we do it for ourselves. Like you say, we do it for ourselves. And if people like it, hey, that's better. If not, we move on, right?
Yeah.
That's my approach.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with us. People sometimes ask, why do you only take pictures of, divers and not marine life? But for me, I mean, a sidemount diver is much more interesting than, fish in the water. It may sound a bit crazy, but that's just me.
No, not at all. In fact, I had that same comment on one of my videos. The guy said, hey, listen, why aren't you filming scenery instead of sidemount diving? And I said, hey, the site's Sidemount Pros. It's about sidemount diving. It's not about marine life. It's not a travel channel. The idea is that, certainly it's what I'm trying to do. I'm sure it's the same for you. I'm trying to showcase sidemount diving. Showing pictures of sharks and fish and other things isn't going to do that. Sure, I weave a few of them in just so it kind of makes it interesting. But if you're not seeing a sidemount diver, then, what's the point in terms of a sidemount channel?
That's right.
Cool. Well, look, now that I've got you here, so one of the things I've also noted is that you've been doing lots of work on yourself. I see you doing lots of practice. Yeah. I've even seen a couple where you're doing the Michur, many cylinders. I think I saw one with you with 6. Was that right? Yeah. Are you going to get to 10? This will be the next question. Might be a Polish thing, right?
I don't think so. I mean, there's only one Michur, right?
You know what? No. From my discussion with him, the only way anybody could possibly aspire to be as good as him is to practice in the same way that he does. He's clearly talented, but with talent goes a huge amount of practice. And he's in the water 2 hours every single day of the week practicing skills. And if you want to get that good, if you want to be like him, then that's how you do it. No questions or doubts about it.
I completely agree. And, to me, and in fact, that's always been my approach. I'm a very competitive person. I used to, before I started diving, I used to be well into martial arts and I was quite good. I was competing at national and international level. And it's the same, the hours and the amount of work that goes into it is just insane. And people don't see that. People don't realize that. People see the end result and they think, I'm going to try and do the same without actually having to do any hard work. And, like you say, I'm the same. Chloe and I, we would go into our local lake in London. It's not the most fantastic of sites. You don't go there, to have a swim around to look at fish because, let's face it, that's not the idea behind it. But we go and we spend hours just practicing one single skill and we do it over and over again because for us, this ultimate, end result is what we aim for. And going back to your quote, sidemount diving for us, you're probably the same. It's a beautiful way to dive, right? And we have to, expand on that. Like I say, it's not about the redundancy. It's not about the, looking good in photos and videos. It's about, there's this certain point in your diving when everything comes together. Your setup, your configuration, you're trimmed out and you're balanced and your buoyancy is good. And to me, it's like you reach this ultimate feeling of freedom of movement in the water. You become sort of like one with the water. And to get that feeling, it's just such an amazing feeling. It's just something that, to us, it's what sidemount diving is all about.
Yeah, totally agree. I talk about this a lot on courses. The objective is to get to a point where you're no longer fighting your equipment and you're no longer fighting the water. And it's as you say, and then you're one both with the equipment configuration you're wearing and also with your environment and your surroundings. And if you can get that feeling, it is so pleasurable, I will say, in terms of your diving. You just get this feeling of zen. You feel like you're in control. You can be where you want to be when you want to be there. You move efficiently in the water. It's comfortable. You can relax. And so let's for a moment explore how you get there. So right from the very beginning, if we break it back, let's talk about even the way you and Chloe went about it in the Canary Islands, where Chloe broke her equipment back down. So what did she do? What did she focus on as she broke her equipment down? Because I think it starts there, doesn't it? It starts with the equipment, getting that right. Then you start putting that in the water.
It starts there. And unfortunately, we bought our kit. We bought the XD Tech Wings. And, I kind of set everything up for myself and Chloe. It wasn't perfect. You get in the water, like you say, dive one and everything's nice and trimmed out and you feel balanced, you feel stable. And then you go back in after your break and you just feel all over the place. And you think there must be something there that could be potentially changed. So it's just, making sure everything fits, making sure, all the adjustments are there, everything sits nicely against your body. You feel like the wing and the harness are actually part of you. And then obviously, what follows is, all the configurations, making sure that, your bolt snaps are positioned correctly, your bungees are set up correctly, the length is correct. So that takes practice, but it also takes a bit of knowledge, right? Because unless you know what you're doing, you're never ever going to get there. And I always tell my students, get yourself a good instructor because yes, you can watch YouTube videos, you can subscribe to, podcasts or get yourself, I don't know, PDF files off the internet. You'll get the idea, but unless you've actually tried it with someone who's actually knowledgeable, who knows how to work all that, you're just going to struggle. And we know it firsthand because we've struggled ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you and I went through that same thing, didn't we? We, unfortunately, in the days, or certainly that I had it, we didn't have things like Steve Martin's videos either, which just quietly, I think are an amazing resource. If you don't have access to an instructor, or if you do, and then you want a reference for after that, where you don't necessarily absorb everything on the course, do you? So just a chance to be able to reflect back on everything that you need to be able to do, from your harness setup through to you setting your cylinders, setting your regulators, putting it in the water, and then figuring out your weighting, figuring out your trim and buoyancy control, and then starting propulsion. All of that flows. The way I describe that is the way I run a course. Let's talk about that for a moment, and maybe we can to and fro a bit on it, because when I run courses, the first thing I do, I used to do it a little differently, but now I set the harness up first, because I think everything flows from the harness. And what I'm doing first, it comes from X-Deep setup. The first thing I do is remove all the bits off it that I don't like to use, and I don't know whether I'm going to meet Patrick Woodman pretty soon, and I'll find out why some of those bits are on there. But I take off some of the bungee connections at the side, and I do that a different way. But the thing I'm most focused on at the beginning is getting those two nodes in the right place. The upper node right between the shoulder blades, and the lower node right in the bottom of the lumbar spine, just above the butt. And that gives you the right length of the harness, which I think is really critical in the beginning. Is that the way that you do it as well?
That's exactly what I do, because, let's face it, adjusting shoulder straps or even a cross strap is easy, right? You just adjust the length. But yeah, I completely agree. Those two plates, unless they sat in the proper position, you are going to have a hard time. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's just not going to feel right. So yeah, this is the first thing I ever do with my students as well. Because the standard setup is fairly decent, right? So luckily, a lot of people that you actually, dive with or teach, the adjustments are really, really minimal. Unless you have a really, really small person, I find that, you may move it by literally half an inch or so, but that's all you need, right?
Anatomy of the human body is quite interesting as well. I'm not very tall, and I had a very, very tall guy as one of my students on my last course, and we did the measurements. And interestingly, all of that height differences, but well, not all of it, but the vast majority of it is in his legs. So the difference in our torso length is actually not that great. And so it was actually super interesting to see, we needed to move it for him. And I know I needed to move mine as well, but they're not big adjustments. But having said that, getting it right is important. You mentioned a couple of reasons so everything fits. But the other reason too is that the way you set your cylinders up is very much driven by the distance from under your armpit down to where your sliding D-ring is going to be. And if you have that lumbar node in the wrong place, it's going to lift your waist strap up or down, which is going to mean that the sliding D-ring's in the wrong place. It should be sitting on your hips, not on your waist. And that gives you the nice length that then gives you the really nice hold of the cylinder. And so then your attachments are starting to work for you. And if that's too short in particular, you're going to find you get really poor hold at the bottom of the cylinder. If it's too long, you're going to find that it's not fitting under your armpit correctly. And so it's important to really be able to get that right. The other things I do too, giving away lots of tips from the course here now, but there's a double D-ring on the crotch strap. So I take that second D-ring off. That I can't even figure out what the use of that is. You've still got your crotch D-ring for your DPV, but you've also got your butt D-ring there. So the third one, it goes away and goes in the bag. And from there, then I'm going through multiple adjustments, just getting the shoulder straps right, the waist strap and the crotch strap correct, and allowing enough room for dry suits, wetsuits, whatever you're going to be diving. And then from there, there's one more thing that I do, and I'm not sure if you do this. I've seen a few people do, is I bungee down the wing as well, the butt of the wing to the bottom of the weight pockets. And the reason for that is you can get some ballooning if you're not careful there. So just a little strip of bungee through there to bungee that down makes a big difference to the whole of the BCD at the bottom. And then you're pretty much there. You've got sort of chest D-rings to adjust. You've got to decide what sort of sliding D-rings you're going to use, or whether you're going to use multiple fixed D-rings, depending on the type of cylinders and diving you're doing. Anything to add?
No, I think it's pretty much the same. Like you say, we get rid of, and for me, I'm very, my approach is always to be as minimalist as possible. So I always remove the unnecessary hardware. When I dive for myself, obviously I won't do it with students because it's a bit of a struggle, but I only use one D-ring on my waist strap, and it's a semi-slidable D-ring. So for me to adjust it, I'd sort of like have to kind of wiggle it up and down to be able to move it. But the advantage of that for me is with tank, it just does not move unless I actually move it myself. i.e. wiggle it, it will always stay in one place. So it's sort of like a fixed steering. So when I teach, obviously, for a student, it's a bit of a hard work. So yes, I will use either another steering or a slider, like yourself, and we just take it from there. Bungees, I don't use bolt snaps unnecessarily. So for example, my inflator hose is always going to be on a bungee. I don't use a bolt snap to attach it to the steering. I always stress the importance of to get this feeling of, like I said, going back to the freedom and the balance. And, you do actually feel very, very kind of free in side mount in the water. So I say, let's use it to its full potential. If we don't have to overload our wing with, unnecessary hardware, let's not do it, right? So that's my approach to it.
Yeah, exactly. No, spot on. I agree 100%. And then from there, so once I've done the harness, then the next thing I do is set the cylinders up. A couple of tips here as well is loop bungees, I think clearly are the way to go. Steve Martin does a really good description of that. You can use a continuous bungee, which is the other method. I don't think chokers really belong in side mount anymore. I think it's a bit of an old school way of doing it, particularly for steel cylinders, but I dive steel most of the time. And like loop bungees work perfectly for steel. So it's really just a matter of setting those up, getting them the right length, making sure they're in the right position. And then the real key is getting that bottom attachment on your cylinder and that bolt snap in the right position. Typically, you're aligning it in line with the extension post opposite the valve hand wheel. Sometimes you'll be a little bit forward, a little bit back, depending on the type of cylinder. And then the height of it is really where it gets really critical as well. And so you're measuring that distance from your armpit. And interestingly, Audrey did a video on this. So I'm not sure where it is. If I can find a link for it, I'll put it in the podcast notes, because I used to measure from the armpit to my hip where the D-ring is and take that length and then make that the height of the cylinder band. But Audrey's come up with a new way where she's folding the clip over and she's measuring from your armpit to the folded clip top. And then you do that when you're locating it. The reason for that's really interesting is that if you've got the cylinder mounted correctly, the clip does fold over when the cylinder's tight to you in that direction. That is the correct measurement. So for a long time, I had it obviously it felt okay on me, but I had it somewhat wrong, and she's come up with a better way. So that's an awesome way to be able to measure that. And the net result of having your loop bungees correct and that clip and the band in the correct position is that when you move, the cylinders move. They're really tight into your body. And if you move left or right, sideways, upside down, whatever, they really, really do stay with you. And that's a kind of an important part of it. The equipment should feel like it's part of you. It shouldn't be moving independently of you.
Most definitely. And, you've got, like you say, you do actually feel it, right? You can feel it right along your body and along along your hip. And even, with regard to doing, I always get my students to purposely just move it out of trim or whatever, and for them to, do proper trim checks so they can actually get used to and actually know how to trim their cylinders out underwater. But when it sits right, you don't even need to check it because you can feel it. You know it, right?
You can.
It's pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. You can. And you can feel the imbalance over time. And I often will just push them into the sides of my hips and feel it on my hip bone. And then that's in the right place. Yeah, One thing I do love about diving aluminium as well, I kind of miss it a little bit, is we're typically diving dry suits with quite thick undergarments here. So aluminium, you can do it, but you end up wearing a lot of weight. So we tend to dive steels. But one thing I love about aluminium, because they become so much more buoyant as you consume gas, as you get down to 120 bar, especially 100 bar, and they start to float up. If you've got them set up correctly, they actually torque into your body. So they actually start to squeeze in a bit. And I love that feeling because through the dive, as they get lower, they become more and more part of you. It's not like they become less and less. And of course, if you slide the sliding D-rings forward a little bit, they stay in the right position. And so you've got these cylinders that it's wound into your body. It's so cool. I do like diving aluminium as well. For that reason.
I don't know as well. So for us, obviously in the UK, we've always, we always dive steels, right? So I always used to love steels. I got used to steels. And when we were still kind of, new to side mount and still learning, I remember we went away and what do? You dive wetsuit and aluminiums. I hated it. Oh my God, I hated it. And, just the sheer fact of, your cylinders are just getting so buoyant. They just misbehave. You think to yourself, this is a hassle. But it's part of it. You have to learn it. You have to get experience. You have to get good at it. You have to know how to fix it, how to adjust it, how to change it. And then your cylinder, like you say, your aluminium cylinder, especially when it gets neutral, it's just part of you. It's cool.
Oh, exactly. And then if you need to take one off, that's the advantage too. If you take a steel off, it's never very much fun. Whereas with an aluminium, as you say, is when they're neutral or close to that, or even when they're a little buoyant, they're very, very easy to manage because you're not lifting any weight at all, are you? And that kind of points to an important point about removing cylinders and side mount. You can remove steels, there's no doubt. However, especially when they're full, it's a bit of a challenge. And I wouldn't recommend it unless, I think if you're in a situation where cylinder removal is part of your dive plan, then your aluminium is going to be your tool of choice.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I mean, going back to the setup and configurations, I do think it's exactly the same way. The positioning of the bolt snap is exactly the same. When I do actually go through the course with my students, I do get them sometimes to adjust it, to move the bolt snap, let's say, back or forward a bit, just for them to experience the difference, to see, how this little change, because I stress to my students all the time, a tiny little adjustment plays a huge role on the overall setup and your overall feeling underwater. And, how it impacts other things as well is really, really important. So I actually get them to experience it. So I will move the bolt snap away and they can actually feel it. They can see the difference of, how the tanks are behaving. Is there more or less tension on the bungee? How this one little change triggers everything else, if you like.
And I put that under perfection of your art, right? It's kind of like learning what changes actually, because sometimes you do them because you've been told to, but without really knowing why that is important.
Yeah, you don't know.
So what you're stressing now is to understand the why. What does this do? And it's a really solid point. So once we've set everything up and now we're going to put it in the water, what do you focus on next? Those first couple of dives in the water when you're teaching?
So for me, the first couple of dives is, obviously with regard to skills, we only go into the basic, regulatory exchanges and stuff. But for me, it's all about trim and balance. The way I look at it, your balance, your buoyancy, unless you've got that kind of, sorted out, none of the skills are going to work. So just imagine, trying to get your student to remove or restore the long hose and they just kind of, all over the place like a yo-yo. Right? It's not going to happen. So I always make sure that, we are fully trimmed, we are fully balanced. If we need to change the weight distribution, we do it. We get out and we do that. So I try to get them to kind of, reach that level, that point of actually being nicely buoyant, nicely balanced in the water, and then we go through the skills. But that's the initial step is always the trim and balance thing for me. A huge focus on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And the one thing I do before that, which maybe you do, but just stepped over, which was the donning and doffing procedure, which is just so important before you get in the water, understanding that there's a process for that. Like there's lots of ways to don, and if you want to, you could do it pretty much in any order you want to, but there'll be specific reasons why there's a process that works better than another one. And so for me, I'm always donning the left cylinder first. And the reason for that is really more to do with dry suit diving than wetsuit, but it was also to do with the long hose. The long hose you want to be over the top of everything else except the dry suit inflator. So you want to make sure that you don't put that on first, put the long hose on, and then you find you're putting another regulator potentially over the top of that. So if you make sure the left cylinder goes on first, the other reason for that is if you want to get in the water at that point, you've got a gas supply and you've got a buoyancy supply because you've got it plugged in. So now you're good to get in the water, or you're safe in the water now because you've got gas and buoyancy. Putting the second cylinder on is, again, an easy process of doing that, clipping it on and at the bottom, putting your bungee on, deploying the long hose, putting that on. And then the thing that a lot of people get caught out with, if you've got your first stages facing inwards, is the dry suit inflator must go over the top of the long hose. Now, it sounds really counterintuitive. It sounds wrong. And I've had someone point that out to me, say, hey, isn't that wrong? And it's actually not. And the reason is the long hose, because it's on the inside, it deploys above. I know Michu does this a little differently. He actually stows his hoses on the outside, which makes it actually quite easy to stow and unstow. Cave divers don't like that because the hoses are somewhat exposed. But that's the reason. If you're going to stow the hoses on the inside, then the dry suit inflator has to be over. But we practice that a lot because it's the thing that if you're doing a shore dive, not such a big deal. But if you're on a boat and you're struggling with donning and doffing, it's just going to make your life a pain in the butt. And also you're going to find that you get a bit of angst from other people on the boat and potentially boat crews. So you need to get really slick at that skill.
It's an interesting subject because, this whole aspect of boat diving, people will always tell you side mount and boats don't go together. But like you say, it's because probably it's the experiences, it's the divers who struggle on boats and it does trigger, other people as well. But do you do any dry kind of practice with regard to donning and doffing before getting in the water? Or
I do, and it's difficult, but I always do it. Sometimes I've got some 7-liter or 50 cubic feet steel cylinders, Often I'll take those along because they're a little easier to manage out of the water. But we'll sit on a park bench and we'll basically lift the cylinder up, clip it on it, and then do the other side. And it's not too bad if you've got something like a park bench to work with. Interestingly, that process, if you're sitting on the side of a rib, is exactly the same. And I find rib diving can always don the cylinders in the water at any time, provided the sea conditions allow for that. But I find on a rib it's super easy just to use the pontoons and fall elegantly over the side, and you can do your pre-dive checks and team checks really easily out of the water. And I differentiate between rib boat diving and some other kind of charter boat diving where you've got to walk some distance to the entry and exit point. Then I typically would have different strategies. And again, pointing you guys to a resource, if you've ever seen Misha's Double Ender series, he's got multiple ways of addressing exactly that issue, which is entering and exiting from a charter boat where you've got to walk to the jump point. And that is an absolute excellent series where he shows you getting in the water with no cylinders, getting in the water with 2 cylinders, getting in the water with 1 cylinder, diving at the surface, diving at 6 meters. It's just outstanding. So that is a really, really good resource for that particular skill, I think.
Definitely, yeah. No, I was going to say I couldn't agree more. And, it's once you've got the process, once you've got the steps figured out, if you like, just life becomes easy. And you're quite lucky in the Philippines because the waters are always calm and people will always pass your bottles to you once you're in the water. So it just couldn't be any easier.
And interestingly, I've never had an issue with that. I mean, I tend to be polite to boat crews and nice to them, but I've never had an issue with a boat crew member saying, oh, I'm not going to pass your cylinders to you, or I'm not going to take them from you. They're more than happy to do that, especially the ones working for tips, right?
Of course.
The bottom line is that's their job, to support you. And if you've done any sort of full-on technical diving, I mean, there is no way that the average tech diver gets in the water with 3-4 cylinders anyhow.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've always got some sort of boat support assisting you. So I don't see that there's a big problem there. And we just have to chill a bit, make things easy, be polite, and explain to the crew what you need. And then you need to be slick and efficient at what you're doing. So you're not fiddling around and messing around or floating away from the boat while they're trying to hand you the next cylinder. And that just comes from practice, what we were saying before, right?
Practice, yeah, that's it. Practice, experience. And, the beauty, we always stress to the boat guys, we say, listen, guys, all we need is just those 2 cylinders and we can manage everything else. If we've got an issue, we need to change, I don't know, something as trivial as an O-ring or whatever, we've got spares. So, and they know it. And if they see that, you're not actually there causing chaos, they'll be more than happy to help. And actually, it's quite curious for them as well, because once you're doing all your, tinkering and setting up, depending on the type of trip that we do in here, we will rig up our cylinders on the boat because they always rental cylinders here. Yeah, once you're doing all that, everyone's like kind of, what is he doing? That looks cool. And it's like, so it actually, triggers some interest from people and other divers as well.
Yeah. So let's explore that a little bit more, because you mentioned earlier the fallacy, which is side mount diving is not great from boats. And I actually think it is a fallacy in most circumstances. There can be some where it's not. And the reason for that, from my point of view, is that side mount, one of its biggest benefits is flexibility. We can get in the water with no cylinders and have them handed to us. We can get in the water with 1 cylinder, have one handed to us. We can get in the water with both cylinders on, and the same when we're getting out. So there's lots of options depending on the type of boat, the amount of space you have on the boat, the sea conditions, and so on. And I really think if you're starting to get to 4 cylinders, so if you're doing advanced trimix dives or normoxic trimix, you need 4, then it's starting to get to be a little bit of an issue. Having said that, I've done a lot of that in Truck Lagoon, for instance, again, very benign conditions. I've done a bunch of 55, 60 to 65 meter dives there, and never an issue. And one of the things you can do in those circumstances is get them to drop a line over the side with a weight on it, and you can put a couple of prusik loops on there, and then you can just basically clip cylinders on the way in and out, which then makes your job easier and relieves the boat crew. If they've got a lot of other divers to look after, particularly on a technical dive, you can say, hey, listen, I just need you to hand me my first 2 and then hand them down to me. I'm going to clip them on and then do the same getting out. And then they can just pull them out of the water when they're happy to do so. So again, there's strategies and flexibility that makes everything better, I think.
Correct. And I couldn't agree more. And, you always, especially, you see a lot of online wars, people arguing, saying, diving on the side mount on the boat is just not good. But I think, side mount, obviously these days, everyone wants to dive side mount, right? Because it looks cool. It is cool. Everyone wants to have a go. There's a lot of side mount divers that probably haven't even taken any course. They just, self-gunner learners. And that, sometimes I do see why it could cause some kind of issue, whether it's with the boat crew or other divers, because people are all over the place. They struggle. They end up kind of winding themselves up as well because they struggle with this or that. But going back to what you said, once you've got the practice and the experience, it just could not be any easier.
Yeah, and then, of course, once you're in the water, then it shows its real benefits as well in terms of trim, balance, stability. If you're wreck diving and you're penetrating a wreck, I find it much easier in side mount for sure. Thinking of that argument again, I mean, you shouldn't dive side mount on boats, but I would say to them immediately, well, you shouldn't dive back mount in caves. It's kind of the same argument. Can you dive back mount in caves? Of course you can. Sooner or later, you're going to hit a limitation. You're going to hit somewhere you can't go, or you're going to damage the cave, and that's wrong. And you do hit limitations in side mount. So if you're diving in the North Sea, rough conditions, meter plus swells, I just can't see that being a happy way to dive. So, yeah, sure, you hit a limitation, but as I said, that argument can be turned around in terms of other environments. Preaching to the converted, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and people always say, that use the right tool for the job. And it's true, but I choose to dive side mount, and for me, it's the right tool. And yeah, and I love it. I'm not going to dive anything else. And if I can't dive side mount, I just won't dive. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is an element of, for some people, the right tool for the job, particularly people who are just doing an extraordinary amount of diving and have the time to be able to build back mount skills, side mount skills, rebreather skills. Look, if you're diving enough, fine, I get it. But I'm trying to think, when is side mount not the right tool? As I said, North Sea, big dives, big swells. Okay, I get it. You might be a bit more comfortable with a back mount setup and waddling to the entry, hoping you don't fall over, and then grabbing a cylinder and jumping and away you go. But
no, I was going to say, I love one of the quotes that you keep using in your podcast as well, saying, I can do everything that a back mount diver can do, plus more. And it is so true, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, look, I hope that's helped a lot of people in terms of giving some more background. I mean, we've talked about the equipment setup. We've talked about a lot about why dive side mount, its flexibility and its benefits and so on, and the importance of practicing your donning and doffing procedure. You mentioned the importance of trim, buoyancy control, balance in terms of skill development, and that's exactly correct. I mean, a good example of that, again, is the back kick. If you are not in trim and correct buoyancy, trying to execute a back kick is just going to result in you going up to the surface, going to the bottom, or not moving at all, one of those. So, and the other thing I do say too is that you want to start to get the skill, if we call it that, of the relaxed static stability, being still, to be subconscious. So you're actually doing it without thinking about it anymore. So then as you would layer other skills on top of that, any of the skills that we do, the regulator free flows, the valve drills, donating gas, out of gas scenarios, stowing the long hose, which I've always maintained is actually the toughest skill in side mount, would you believe, is stowing the long hose. The first loop is fine, but getting that second loop in when you're exiting the water is a real problem for a lot of people. And there's one that I struggle with for quite some time. And if I can give one tip on that, it's keep your shoulders square. Don't let yourself tilt to one side or the other, because you're immediately going to have to kick to get yourself balanced. So keep your shoulders square while you're doing it. Watch Misha do it. I don't know if you've got some video of you doing it, but that is the big tip for that one.
I couldn't agree more. And, in fact, for us, it was the same problem. I remember going back to the lake, Chloe and I would spend, hours just doing nothing but this one particular skill. But another tip from me is, because we have the tendency to kind of look at the things that we're doing, right? So don't look down, don't look at your cylinder, don't look at your hose. Try to maintain this, balanced, trimmed up position, look forward. So I always use control line exactly the same as Steve and Audrey using their courses. And it's great because you can put a marker point on it as a reference for them. And I just say, I want you to focus your eyes on that and then try and do the skills. Obviously, they'll struggle with it, but it helps. It helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does go with keeping your shoulders square, doesn't it? So by keeping your body square, head up and looking forward. And of course, folding the first loop of the hose over, finding your first hose retainer, feeding it back, and then being able to do that, looking forward. And the other thing it gives you is it gives you your awareness, right? So you've got your team awareness, you've got your depth awareness. Obviously, that makes a big difference in your ability to hold a level and maintain your position in terms of a team member as well.
Yeah, I had a student once and I said, okay, we're going to ascend, we're going to do our safety stops, and I want you to start restowing your hose. But I want you to do it, with me. We are a team, we are ascending and we're doing it together, looking at each other. And yeah, I mean, you can imagine, he starts swimming all around me, up and down. And it takes a lot of hard work. So it is a really, really hard skill to master. But I promise you, once you've done it properly, once you've tried it and practiced it a few times, it just could not be any easier. It's harder with steels because steels will just drop as soon as you unbungee them. With aluminiums, it's a dream, right?
Yeah, and the other thing, I mentioned the back kick. The back kick will change your life. Because normally you swim in a circle because you're crashing into your buddy, right? So if you've got a back kick, if you find yourself going forward a bit, you can bring yourself back again and maintain the correct spacing or a good spacing. It makes a world of difference in everything you do, whether it be team ascent, stowing hoses, skills, gas switching, all those sorts of things. So work on getting that back kick really as early in your diving as you possibly can.
It's your back kick, it's your helicopter turn. I always say to people, because obviously, everyone wants to get in the water and take pictures, right? So I say, you want to take pictures, make yourself static, make yourself stable, use your finning techniques to actually help yourself rather than work against it. And we do focus a lot of attention on those skills.
Brilliant. We've talked a lot about side mount diving, and I hope that everyone's got a lot out of that. I've really enjoyed hearing your perspectives and mapping them to mine. There's lots of schools around the world too, if you like there's the Mexico Bogarthian, which Tom and Audrey teach pretty much that way as well. It's good to be able to map those and share ideas. And I always pick up ideas from people every time. Like, for instance, that your one about keeping your head up was a reminder for me. That's an excellent tip for anyone on any skill, is to keep your head up and make sure you're focused on your team and not be looking away in other directions or at your equipment, because you immediately lose your team awareness, which is not great. So tell us a bit about what's coming up. I want to know more about the diving you're doing in the Philippines right now, and also what you're planning when you go to Bali and Indonesia. What's a dive day look like for you at the moment?
Philippines, unfortunately, there's not many caves in here, or at least there's not many caves that we are actually close to. So it's all pretty much wall diving, but it's pretty cool. It's deep walls. We can do some proper technical diving, so, hence the 4 cylinders and, mixed gases and all that kind of stuff. But it's primarily boat diving, especially where I am now. I'm in Bohol, one of the islands in the Visayas. It's all like central Philippines. Yeah, it's boat diving, and we just go and have fun, really, to be honest with you. So like I say, whether it's 2 or 4 cylinders, if we decide to do deep dives, there's plenty of room for that. But other than that, we just dive. All we want to do here is dive, get some experience, do some teaching if possible. And the plan is to move to Bali and then hopefully, carry on with that. I do want to start doing some more teaching and hopefully, find a dive center or someone that's just as passionate as I am about side mount diving specifically, and just focus on that. Side Mount Society, our dream ultimate goal is to find a place somewhere that we can settle, hopefully open some kind of Side Mount Society, side mount dive related business. We haven't figured out where we want to do it yet, but we're definitely going to try and do something about it. Just see where life takes us and take it from there.
Yeah, and a couple of suggestions. I'm not sure if Yvonne Press is still in Bali, but if she is, she'd be a great contact.
Actually spoken to her. I have actually spoken to her a couple of times, but that was months ago when we initially decided to go to Bali. So I do have to reach out to her because, she's running a fantastic business over there. She's quite active. She keeps posting a lot of videos online as well, and, they're all cool. So, I'm actually looking forward to going out there and meeting her in person.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And then Indonesia, Robin Cuesta, who I just dived with in Mount Gambier recently, has got Sulawesi dive trek. Are you a cave diver as well?
We certified with Audrey this year.
Oh, congratulations. Oh, that's awesome. Well, look Robin up. He's a fantastic guy. It's a bit off the beaten path there. There's a bit of travel to do. It's pretty remote, but some really exciting caves he's uncovered there. And as I mentioned in my last episode, in fact, 2 episodes back it will be when this one comes out, when I talked to Ranva Jormanson about Expedition Booting 2023, where they're going to meet up with Robin and take just a team of absolute stellar divers, including Jill Heineth, Natalie Gibb, many, many others. It's just going to be extraordinary. And I think it'd be a great place to go, and I'm certainly excited about that. And having dived and met Robin and had a bit of social time with him as well, he's an amazing guy. That'd be a cool place to go.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking forward to actually seeing some photos and videos from that.
Yeah, well, maybe not till next year, but it's going to be good to watch them, I think, go through the actual process of setting that expedition up too, because as Ranva said, they've kind of announced it early, like a year out, and it's quite unusual to do that. Normally you hear about expeditions after they're done. And so they're kind of exposing themselves a bit, I think, in their mind, if things don't work out. But at the same time, I think what they're doing is giving us a view into what it takes to set up an expedition and all of the work that goes in behind the scenes in terms of the training they're doing on the Sidewinder and all of the logistics and different aspects of setting up that particular project, including all the scientific work that they're doing and the community work as well. really exciting. And I think that's another one worth following. If anyone's not following, it's through Nixie Expeditions, which is run by Marie Bollerup's business, and also through their Facebook and Instagram pages. So yeah, good one to follow.
Definitely.
Well, mate, it's been amazing. It's brilliant to meet you and talk some more about your diving and also to share quite a bit on Sidemount. And I love the fact that, as I said in the beginning of this episode, that we could start to get into some detail about Sidemount again. And hopefully that's helpful to some of the people who might be brand new thinking about Sidemount, or perhaps struggling with some of the things that you and I struggled with in terms of setting things up. I agree with your point. Find a great instructor if you can. A great instructor should have video that you can go and look at, or at the very least, you should be able to go and check something out that tells you that they're good, whether it be reviews from previous students and so on. And I remember I saw one on you as well. I think one of your students had some really nice things to say as well. That was another thing that brought your name up to me. So congratulations, mate, and I hope you enjoy with Chloe the rest of your adventures this year. And I look forward to seeing much more as you travel to different parts of the world. And when you finally do land somewhere, I'm coming to visit, I promise.
Definitely.
So make sure it's somewhere nice.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we don't know where it's going to be yet, but yeah, you are going to be coming to see us, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch you again soon.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you got a lot out of that episode. It was brilliant to be able to chat with Chris and go back to our roots of Sidemount diving, looking at equipment configuration setup and how to put it in the water. It was also amazing to learn about Chris and Chloe's aspirations for Sidemount Society, why they set it up, and what they're hoping to achieve. I'd like once again to thank our amazing sponsor XDeep for their support of the show. There is no question the show would not exist without their support, and I'm very, very grateful. Also to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount who support me every single episode. Thanks so much. If you'd like to become a patron of this show, then please go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount. It can be as little as $5 US per month, and it makes a massive difference to my ability to produce the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.